Now, the case has been made in my previous videos as I've been discussing slavery in the Bible, specifically slavery in the Old Testament as sanctioned by the Mosaic Law, that slavery was not non-consensual ownership of human beings. It was not a socio-economic system under which certain persons were deprived of freedom, or were held against their will, or kidnapped, or were deprived of the right to leave, despite brutality by their masters, or the right to receive compensation or wages in return for their labor, and where people could be treated less than human. It was, in fact, and as I've presented already, and if you haven't seen the previous videos, I would encourage you to do so now, the Hebrew form of slavery, or slavery as sanctioned by the Mosaic Law, was a voluntary system designed to help the poor escape poverty. Slaves never lost their humanity. The Hebrews were forbidden to treat slaves like other animals or possessions such as furniture. The Hebrews were instructed to love their slaves and to show the same respect as shown to free people. The Hebrews were forbidden to use brutality in regards to their slaves, and slaves could be treated the same in many respects as free people, and were to be treated as free people. Slaves oftentimes had the same rights and privileges as free people, and slaves could own slaves and were paid wages. Foreign slaves had the same rights, however the dietary, interest, and debt laws were not applied to the foreigner. There were time limits for the Hebrew slaves and escape clauses that applied to all slaves. And slave trading, as well as any form of kidnapping, was illegal. The only clear case of involuntary servanthood was in the case of a thief that was too poor to make restitution for goods stolen. And here it was strictly an economic measure, Exodus 22 verse 3. But even this seems more like a prison sentence than it was what we would deem slavery. Now, before I change this discussion to the issues in the New Testament, I need to point out that we've been discussing the Mosaic Law and what the Israelites were supposed to do. As we read the Old Testament, it should become apparent to us that the Israelites did not follow the law, did not always follow the law, and this includes obeying the law in regards to slavery, and regarding to the issues surrounding slavery. And this is why God would eventually allow Israel and Judah to be taken away by foreign nations and lose their blessings. Here are some of the passages where Israel and the Israelites did not follow the law as instructed in regards to the institution of slavery. Joshua 9:18, 1 Samuel 8:6, 1 Kings 2:38 through 39, 1 Samuel 25:9, 2 Kings 4:1, 2 Chronicles 28:8 through 15, Amos 8:4, Jeremiah 34, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Jeremiah 34 in a second, Ezekiel 9:9, and Nehemiah chapter 9 verses 36 through 37. I would encourage everyone that is interested in this topic to read Jeremiah 34. This was a major point in the revival under Zedekiah with the Babylonian army outside Judah's door, and illustrates both God's intent for freedom and Israel's failure to obey from the start the laws regarding a lot of the laws, especially the ones regarding slavery. This incident was even solemnized by another ceremony covenant. Needless to say, God's response is quite clear in this passage, and his attitude towards permanent servanthood is obvious. Finally, the Hebrew word for slave is ebed, E-B-E-D, and I've already discussed that in a previous video, and is sometimes translated as servant. I thought I would share with you some of the most famous people, or more famous people of the Old Testament who were called ebed, or servants or slaves in the Old Testament. Abraham, Genesis 26:24, Moses, Numbers 12:7, Caleb, Numbers 14:24, King David, 2 Samuel 3:18, the Messiah, Isaiah 42:1, Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah 25:9, Zerubbabel, Haggai 2:23, and the prophets, 2 Kings 9:7. And servant or slave could be used virtually of any subordinate in the sense of authority to anyone seeking something from a more powerful figure. The point of these examples is to show that the term servant or slave could refer to kings, military leaders, patriarchs, priests, servants, and the general population. In general, it is merely reflected a relative and sometimes temporary position of authority or influence. In summary, in the Old Testament, we have no reason to believe that God condoned chattel slavery or slavery as we know it and understand it. and indeed we have substantial bodies of data and argument to support the contrary. The next part of this next video and the rest of the series, we will now turn our attention to slavery in the New Testament. Thank you.